I didn't hear you. Okay, Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you. The third item is the report on the monthly financial results from October 2017. B.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Today we will review the year-to-date financial results through October 2017. Revenue continues to be impacted by lower ridership, the reduction in state funding for reduced fare programs, and weakening sales tax growth. But service board expense performance continues to be strong. The size of the Chicago area labor force increased slightly in October, while the number of employed individuals decreased by 1,400. As a result, the regional unemployment rate was flat compared to prior month at 5.1%, widening the gap with the national rate, which improved to 4.1%. Before we continue with the results versus budget, let's look at the October 2017 reforecast dashboard, which shows actual results versus the 2017 reforecast. You'll notice generally a lack of highlights, which is good. Essentially, the screen tells us that the service boards are managing the reforecast they provided. So far, this is true for ridership, operating revenue, and operating expense, where the overall system is relatively balanced. PACE ADA has a favorable operating revenue of 5.1% due to the recent receipt of Medicaid reimbursements. One area of concern, which is outside of the service board's control and to a certain extent outside of our control as well, is recent sales tax and PTF results continue to fall short of even the amended funding by about 1%. This is due in part to the state's 2% sales tax surcharge and the state fiscal year 2018 PTF 10% reduction, and further them taking it sooner than had been anticipated. So now going back to the original budget dashboard, system ridership through October was 3.4% lower than budget, as shown by the orange bars on the chart. Ridership has been down from prior year in each month, and total ridership is down 3.2% from 2016. Looking at the summary table again, here we go. Each service board reported year-to-date ridership results below budgeted levels. As indicated by the red boxes, PACE Suburban Service ridership was 7% unfavorable to budget, and ADA paratransit ridership was 4.5% unfavorable. Although PACE remains unfavorable to budget, October did mark the 6th month of year-over-year ridership growth for Suburban Service. CTA ridership is also highlighted in red, with total ridership 3.4% unfavorable to budget, with bus and rail ridership down 4% and 3.3% respectively from 2016. Now let's look at operating revenue. That was $21.5 million or 2.2% unfavorable to budget. The shortfall is due to the combined effect of unfavorable fare revenue and the lower level of reduced fare reimbursement. CTA is most heavily impacted by the reduction in reduced fare reimbursement, while PACE Suburban Service has the most substantial fare revenue shortfall due to the lagging ridership. Both are highlighted in red. ADA paratransit operating revenue was 8.1% unfavorable, also highlighted due to lower ridership, delayed state payment of Medicaid reimbursements, and the lower reimbursements for RTA certification trips. So now looking at public funding, this shows a shortfall from budget of 3.9% for the region, with unfavorable results for CTA and Metro. CTA and Metro were unfavorable to budget by 5.2% and 5.4% respectively, both highlighted in red. The shortfalls are again due to lagging sales tax and PTF, underperforming real estate transfer tax revenue, and the state-imposed funding reductions. So total public funding now is $50.2 million unfavorable to the original 2017 funding amounts. Looking at system-wide expenses through October, they were $67.4 million or 3% favorable to budget, with CTA Metro PACE Suburban Service continuing their strong expense performance. CTA had a 3.5% favorable to budget expense performance, highlighted in the light blue, primarily due to savings in labor, fuel, and injury and damages. PACE Suburban Service had a 3.6 favorable to budget expense performance, also highlighted in blue, due to administration, maintenance, and operational savings. PACE ADA's unfavorable expense variance has lessened over the last couple of months, and ADA's operating deficit variance has improved from 4.9% unfavorable at the end of the second quarter to 2% unfavorable through October. The improving trend is consistent with the action plan that they presented to this board during the second quarter certification process. Looking at the regional level, the favorable operating expenses were not strong enough to offset the unfavorable operating revenue and public funding, so it produced a net result that was $4.3 million unfavorable to budget. But this is still an improvement of $0.3 million from last month's results. Through October, the regional recovery ratio is favorable to budget by 0.9 percentage points. This represents a growing margin due to the recent improvements in service board operating revenue performance and actively managing expenses. The fair revenue recovery ratio of 36.5 includes passenger fare revenue only and is what we call the pure recovery ratio. It is up 0.3 percentage points from last month. When ancillary board revenue is included, the revenue recovery ratio increases to 42.5% for year-to-date through October. It is also up by 0.4 percentage points. In the right section, we show the year-to-date statutory recovery ratio of 50.9%, above that all-important 50% level in our statutory requirements. Metro recovery ratio continues to be significantly favorable to budget, while CTA has improved to be slightly favorable to budget. PACE lags budget by 1.2 percentage points due to their operating revenue shortfall. In summary, the service board's expense results continue to improve such that the regional recovery ratio is on track to exceed the year-end 50% requirement. That concludes my remarks. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Director Lewis.
The last several months we've come through, the service boards seem to have done a very good job in terms of reducing their expenses. But the old adage, you can't cut your way to prosperity, seems to be taking hold. So is it fair to say if we don't find an alternative source for either passenger usage or funding sources that this expense reduction strategy probably at some point won't work as well as it has in the past?
Well, that's correct, but remember for 2018, they've incorporated their fare increases, they've reduced their expenses, they've eliminated vacancies, they've done some freezing of existing vacancies. So they've implemented a lot of cost containment measures for 2018, as well as they've increased their fares. So they do have balanced budgets at this time. But yes, ridership has been projected, several of them projected a slight reduction in ridership, and PACE's projections, I think, are much more realistic. So I think that all of that will help to bring in a balanced budget next year.
Other questions or comments? Director Ross, I'm sorry.
Are the Medicaid dollars for PACE ADA, are those federal pass-through dollars, or are those from the general
They
budget?
are federal pass-through dollars, but they're distributed at the state's discretion and timing.
But if they're federal dollars, why is there a delay from the state in getting the payment?
There's always been a delay. I think part of it is certainly when they do their reconciliation process. We can get just a slew of payments for Medicaid. Same thing happened with ambulance fees and things like that for municipalities. It's unpredictable is the best way to describe it.
And so if they haven't made those payments by the end of the fiscal year, do we lose those dollars?
We do not. We've seen payments come in from 1 to 2 years ago. So we do still get them. However, for purposes of reporting, financial reporting, certainly your auditors will only allow so much time to consider it an active receivable. It's not an actual loss because you will get the money, but it would be considered like a paper loss.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Director DeWitt.
Thank you, Chairman. B, you mentioned early in your presentation that the 2% fee that the state is now charging public entities to reappropriate tax dollars is being taken earlier than we had anticipated. Can you talk a little bit about when they started taking it, when we were under the impression they were going to start taking it, and what the effect of that currently is?
So for 2017, We had anticipated, our budget staff here at the RTA, incorrectly apparently, that it would begin with the July sales tax, which we do not see until 3 months later. So we expected it to kick in, August, September, October. So October, we thought that's when we would first see it. Instead, it kicked in, I'd have to check exactly, but I think Martin, do you know? May. I was going to guess May, but anyway, it kicked in for the month of May. So that was, months earlier than we had anticipated, 5 months earlier. So at about $2 million, that's pretty significant. So that was one example. And then on the public transportation fund match. So I guess one way to look at it is we looked at it as beginning with the July sales tax. However, the state has interpreted it to be processing fees. So I guess they're looking at it as when they process the tax, not from the month in which it was collected.
But they in effect made it retroactive to May of.
No, because they're looking at it as a processing fee. So when they're processing it is post the state budget passing. They're not looking at it, they're interpreting it not in terms of when the sales tax was collected, which was pre the budget passing. So that's the difference, if you will.
So it's a difference in interpretation. I could see how it could be looked at both ways, but certainly that was not our understanding. And the worst thing is we were not informed.
And the legislation is vague as to when it would actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that it's a processing fee. And so we were kind of anticipating that they might take this action. We were hoping that they wouldn't, but it's not completely unexpected that they would charge the fee as of when they started processing it versus the funds that were collected after the statute became effective. So technically, it's not retroactive.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much, Bea, for that presentation. The next item is the item 4A, which is an ordinance authorizing quarterly capital amendment. Jill, I believe you're making that.
Good morning. I'm actually going to turn this over to Dave Spacek, who's the manager of the capital program for this quick amendment.
Morning, Dave.
Thanks, Jill. Good morning and happy holidays to Director Megalis and members of the Finance Committee. We have a short capital program amendment for your consideration today. Staff is requesting the board approve 2 ordinances. The first ordinance amends the 2017-2021 capital program to incorporate a minor change in program revenue and expenditures for the CTA. The second ordinance approves time extensions for implementation of Metra and PACE's innovation, coordination, and enhancement funded projects. The 2017-2021 capital program funding changes. The first ordinance to amend the 2017-2021 capital program is a result of a change to the amount of federal discretionary funds awarded in a core capacity grant to the CTA to reflect the actual amount awarded. The change in funding is an increase of $131,640, which will be added to the 2017 capital program, with no funding changes in the out years. The additional funds will be used for CTA's Red Purple Modernization Project. The 2017 ICE project time extension request. The second ordinance requests a 12-month time extension for 6 Metra and 1 PACE ICE projects. A brief description of the projects is provided in your memo that you received. No additional funding is being requested, and staff has reviewed the requests and find them justified. Be happy to address any questions regarding these ordinances.
Certainly, these are housekeeping changes. They're nothing major.
That's correct.
Any questions or comments? If not, could we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Director Karani, second by, Director Melvin. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
8 ayes.
Item 4B is the ordinance adopting the 2018 budget, the 2019 through 20 financial plans, and the 2018 through 22 capital programs of the service boards, and the authority appropriating funds for the 2018 budgets. Before we begins, I'd just like to make a couple of comments. All parties have been out to the different areas of the region, to the different 6 counties in total, made presentations, all the service boards have. In addition, they've not only held public hearings, but they've met with all the county boards throughout the region as well. And so I certainly want to thank everybody that attended all the meetings that they've attended. This has been a challenging year. I mean, everybody at this table knows it, and certainly the service boards know it. It's challenging not just because of 2018 issues of cutting $100 million or finding sources for funding that $100 million. It's right on top of just having made a $75 million cut in 2017, which unfortunately the service boards were not aware of until July, when basically the state budget was approved, which took away some of the funding and also charged some fees that Bea was just talking about. But more importantly, it happened so late in the year that by the time those items came to this board, we just did them a couple months ago. So on top of that $75 million, we moved into this budget that we're considering today, the 2018 budget, with another substantial reduction in available funds of $100 million. I would just like to say, from what we've seen, the hearings that we've had and meeting with the county, with the different boards, and more importantly, I guess, or as important, was the meeting on the 29th, which all 3 service boards met with finance, and most of you of the board were in attendance at those meetings. I think what they showed was a real concern and willingness to try to make the best out of a bad situation. I think they all 3 met the challenge that they had, which was considerable. They did it a number of different ways. Maybe everybody's not totally happy, but they had a tough job to do. And they did it by cutting major cuts in expenses. I mean, we saw that throughout the program, where they went into different areas of their budgets and made considerable adjustments to their expenditures. In addition, they certainly looked at ways to find new sources of revenue, which is something we always are confronted with and we need to do. And the CTA met that challenge, as did some of the other boards. And then finally, the thing that nobody really wanted to do, they had to ultimately look at their fares and make some really tough decisions on whether to raise those fares or what to do with them. All 3 service boards, after a lot of review and consideration, did raise or are proposing to raise their fares. Some of those fares, though, in fairness, haven't been raised for 9 years. And so when you consider a service that's operated without raising fares for that long, that's remarkable. But unfortunately, not due to things that the service boards did, but due to outside forces taking away revenue, charging fees, and the sales tax being down, to be honest with you. That had a big impact on 2017 budget, certainly. They do include recommendations of fare increases. So bottom line, I think they've all done an outstanding job. I think they've met the challenge. The budget, as Bea mentioned today, that you're going to hear, is a balanced budget, which is what our legal responsibility is, to make sure that the proposed revenues and expenditures are in line with the statute, and that we feel comfortable with what's been recommended. So I think that it's accomplished by not only the service boards, but it goes way beyond that. It goes back to the point when our executive director and Bea and our other finance people meet with the finance staff of each of those service boards, not in December, not in November, but they started months ago. And they met with them. They worked out differences that we could have had at this board meeting if they hadn't been worked out. And so I give them a lot of credit. They've done an outstanding job. They've done it year after year for the last few years, and it's been really great that Leanne and Bea and all the support that we get from the service boards. So with that said, I think we have a budget that we should be able, hopefully, to adopt today. We've put a lot of time into it in previous meetings and hearings. If we could have a motion to approve item 4B, which is the ordinance for the budget, in a second. Motion by Director Melvin, second by Director Lewis. Any questions or comments about the budget? Would you like to see the presentation? We would like to see that, but if we can get the questions out so that you could address them, that would be the thing I'd like to do. If not, we'll go right into the presentation and then come back to questions. Go ahead. Thank you.
Just a couple, you do know Bill Lackman and his team, Doug Anderson and the other budget staff, but thank you, Director McGallis. We certainly could not do it without these guys. These guys were just constantly revising numbers and running schedules again and so forth. And, a true test of our collaboration, as I've heard many of you say, is when money's really tight in a very challenging year, and it couldn't have gone better. These are very hard decisions for the service boards, but it's ones that were unavoidable. I mean, we just could not produce a balanced budget without the fare increases and the other expense cuts. So anyway, let me turn it over to Bill, because I think you should hear a little bit about some of the public comments that they heard at the various hearings and so forth. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just afraid you were going to steal all of my thunder. So, good morning. I too would like to thank the RTA budget staff, Doug Anderson, Nora Buya, Eva De Laurentiis, and Martin Hunter, as well as the RTA Capital Group for their efforts on behalf of the 2018 RTA Regional Business Plan. As Director McGallis and others have mentioned, this season, like almost every season, presents a unique set of challenges, and the RTA team steps up and adapts to those challenges quite quickly and quite well. Let's just start with a brief recap of the 7-month process that's led us to where we are today. As Director McGallis mentioned, right, this didn't start in October or November. In fact, this started in May when the RTA board approved and released the 2018 business plan call. The business plan call defined the information requirements that the service boards follow in the development of their business plans. The 2018 business plan includes, as you can see on the screen, the 2018 operating budget, the 2019-2020 two-year financial plan, and the 2018 through 2022 5-year capital program. An extremely collaborative effort by the CTA, Metra, PACE, and the RTA resulted in the funding agreement adopted unanimously by the RTA board on August 24th, and that was 3 weeks before the September 15th statutory deadline. Over the course of October and November, the RTA staff conducted a review of the proposed service board business plans and consolidated them into the proposed consolidated them along with the RTA agency business plan into the proposed 2018 RTA regional business plan. This slide shows the RTA 2018 budget and capital program hearing and county board presentation schedule. The Metra and PACE boards adopted their 2018 budgets and capital programs at their November board meetings, followed by the CTA at its December board meeting. At the RTA Finance Committee meeting on November 29th, I presented the proposed RTA 2018 agency budget, and the service boards presented their budgets and fielded your questions. That evening, the RTA held its first public budget hearing. This year's RTA hearings were held later than in previous years and independent of the service board budget hearings. The RTA hearings also featured a presentation and an invitation for public input on the proposed 2018-2023 Regional Transit Strategic Plan. Bea or Leanne briefed each of the 6 county boards on the RTA 2018 regional budget and capital program. Throughout this period, the proposed regional 2018 business plan was available for review and comment on the homepage of the RTA website. In all, there were 30 public hearings on the budget and capital program held throughout the 6-county region from October 16th through December 12th. On this slide, you see a summary of the topics raised by the public at these hearings and via the RTA website. At the RTA Special Finance Committee meeting, Metra and PACE shared an overview of the input that they received at their public hearings. I would also like to thank those directors who attended the RTA public hearings over the last couple of months. Let's now examine the revenue side of the proposed 2018 operating budget. As you're well aware, the state 2018 budget imposed a permanent 2% surcharge on the RTA sales tax collections and a one-year 10% reduction on the state PTF match on the RTA sales tax and the real estate transfer tax. The 2% sales tax surcharge translates into a $24 million annual reduction, and the 10% PTF reduction resulted in $30 million less in 2018 budgeted revenues. Both were reflected in the 2018 funding allocations. Total revenue for 2018 operations is projected at $3 billion, virtually unchanged from the 2017 operating budget. Sales tax receipts of $1.2 billion are the largest revenue component at 41% of the total. Service Board operating revenues from fares and other sources are projected to grow 7.2% to just under $1.2 billion. This is the second largest component at 40%, a 2 percentage point increase in the share of total revenue due to the Service Board fare increases. The state's public transportation fund match on the RTA sales tax and the real estate transfer tax amounts to $368 million, or 12% of total revenue. Reimbursements from the state for debt service on the Strategic Capital Improvement Program bonds is expected to hold steady at $130 million, or 4% of total revenue. The real estate transfer tax, levied in the City of Chicago to fund CTA operations, is projected to increase 3% to $67 million, or 2% of total revenues. Other revenues include the state ADA paratransit funding, federal funding for operations, and RTA agency revenue, and represents 1% of total revenues. Next, a look at the 2018 operating expenses, which are projected to grow by 3.2% from the 2017 reforecast, but only 0.5% from the 2017 budget. Collectively, the Service Board's operating budgets account for more than 90% of regional expenses. CTA's operating budget comprises just over half of regional expenses, followed by Metra at 27%, PACE Suburban Service at 8%, and PACE Regional ADA Paratransit Service at 6%. More on each of these in a moment. RTA Regional Debt Service of $229 million accounts for 8% of regional expenses. This amount includes principal and interest on both RTA skip bonds and RTA bonds that fund the Service Board capital projects, and interest on RTA short-term debt. The RTA issues short-term debt to manage delays in state funding, primarily PTF, which funds Service Board operations, and ASA-AFA, which reimburses the RTA for debt service on skip bonds. RTA agency expenses of $34.3 million account for about 1% of expenses. Finally, joint self-insurance fund expenses of $5.5 million, these are the premiums on insurance policies that cover all three service boards and represent less than 1/4 of 1% of regional operating expenses. Now, a brief look at the Service Board operating budgets, which were presented at the RTA Special Finance Committee meeting on the 29th of November. The CTA will increase fares for the first time since 2009 by 25 cents, and the price of a 30-day pass will increase by $5. CTA's balanced $1.5 million operating budget reflects an expense increase of 3.2% from the 2017 reforecast, but a decrease of 0.6% from the 2017 budget. CTA's budgeted recovery ratio of 57.1% exceeds the RTA requirement of 54.75%. Metra will raise fares for the 4th consecutive year and implement modest service reductions on the Rock Island, North Central, Southwest, and Milwaukee district lines. Metra's $800 million budget is balanced, with revenues expected to grow by 4.3% as a result of the fare increase. Expenses are projected to increase by 4.2% from the 2017 reforecast, but by a lesser amount of only 2% from the 2017 budget. The budgeted recovery ratio of 54.7% exceeds the RTA requirement of 52.5%. PACE will also increase base fares for the first time since 2009 by 25 cents. PACE suburban service operations expenses of $232 million are projected to grow by 3.4% from the 2017 reforecast, but by a lesser amount of 1.5% from the 2017 budget. PACE's 2018 plans include expansion of I-55 bus-on-shoulder service and the startup of the Milwaukee Avenue Arterial Rapid Transit, or ART. The budget is balanced, and the recovery ratio of 30.3% meets the RTA requirement. PACE Regional ADA Paratransit budget incorporates a base fare increase of 25 cents and anticipates ridership growth of about 1%. Total expenses are projected to increase to $178.6 million, due both to ridership growth and contractor rate increases. The ADA paratransit budget is balanced, and the recovery ratio meets the statutory 1% requirement. As a result of the funding reductions and service board fare increases, the regional recovery ratio has increased. Each of the service board's 2018 budgeted recovery ratios meets or exceeds the required level adopted by the RTA board in August. As a result, the regional recovery ratio for 2018 is budgeted at 51.7%, restoring a significant cushion above the 50% statutory requirement. Next, let's review the 2018 RTA Innovation, Coordination, and Enhancement, or ICE program. The allocation of the 2018 RTA ICE funding again followed the process initiated with the 2015 budget. Annual ICE funding grows at the same rate as the RTA sales tax. For 2018, a total of $12.5 million was allocated to the CTA, Metra, and PACE. CTA proposes using ICE funding for operations to continue Southside service improvements begun in 2017, and also to fund K-9 patrols to improve security at CTA rail stations. Metra proposes using ICE funding for several capital projects, which include a train tracking and passenger count system trial, downtown station information displays, and the installation of LED lighting on train cars. PACE proposes using ICE funding for capital to replace Intelligent Bus System, or IBS, equipment. Now a look at the 2018-2022 capital program. The proposed 5-year capital program contains $4.2 billion of expenditures with $1.2 billion programmed for 2018. Note that these amounts are significantly below the $2 to $3 billion of annual capital funding that would allow the region to make significant improvements and to address the region's $19.4 billion state of good repair backlog. For the 5-year capital program, CTA's portion of expenditures is $2.7 billion, or 65% of the total. Metra is $1.2 billion, or 28%, and PACE's is $299 million, or 7%. As you can see, capital funding sources also total $4.2 billion over the 5-year period. Federal funding accounts for $3.3 billion, or almost 80% of the 5-year funding total. Together, the RTA, CTA, and PACE are planning to issue almost $700 million in bonds to fund a portion of the 5-year program, representing 17% of total funding. Funding from the City of Chicago's new ride-hailing fee will be used to pay debt service on $179 million of CTA bond proceeds for state of good repair projects. $152 million of other service board funds and $20 million of RTA ICE funding round out the 5-year capital funding picture. At the RTA Special Finance Committee meeting, you heard from the service boards about their individual capital programs. So I'll provide a regional perspective of the projects included in the $4.2 billion 5-year program. $1.2 billion, or about 30%, will be expended on rolling stock, the largest asset category of the 5-year program. Almost half of this amount, or $600 million, is programmed for Metra rail cars and locomotive rehabilitation and purchases. CTA will also rehabilitate and purchase both rail cars and buses with planned expenditures of $510 million. PACE has programmed $132 million for the purchase of replacement buses, paratransit vehicles, and vanpool vans. Modernization is the second largest asset category at $912 million, comprised of CTA's continuing red-purple modernization plan. Track and structure is the third largest asset category at approximately $400 million. More than half of these funds, or $230 million, will support system-wide infrastructure, safety, and renewal work at the CTA. Metra will use $175 million for system-wide infrastructure improvements, including the replacement of bridges and crossing upgrades. In conclusion, staff recommends board adoption of the proposed operating budget and 5-year capital program as outlined in the presentation. The budget proposals and capital programs that are detailed in the ordinance are balanced, based on reasonable assumptions, and exceed the statutory regional recovery ratio of 50%. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to address any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That certainly brings everything together that we heard at our 29th meeting from the service boards. There are questions and comments. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments and a question. On the pie chart that shows capital funding, when we go out and give public presentations, a suggestion that I have is that you throw a line on there, probably under RTA ICE funding at 0.5%, and I think you put down state of Illinois at 0.00%. I think you need to show that there's a major component, like every other state in America, that's missing here, and that the state contributes 0 to our capital funding. My other question, and I don't need an answer today, Bill, and thank you, Bill and B and all of the fiscal staff for the great job in a very trying year that you've done. In the 2018 operating budget, the RTA's regional debt service this year for 2018, the proposed year, is 8%. I'd like to know what it was in 2014 through 2017, just for my own edification. I just want to watch that number. To me, it's an important oversight we've got here. Much has been said about what is bonded and what is debt service, not only in transit but every other public agency that's around. And I just kind of want to get a handle on what our historic trends are. So thank you much, and thanks for pointing out the recovery ratio. One of the things that gets lost in the discussion, and especially since we've had the uncomfortable discussions on fare increases, is as Director McGallis pointed out, there's a by law a recovery ratio that must be met, and we went through this with the first, and I agree with Director McGallis. It is remarkable that the CTA has gone essentially 9 years and staved off fare increases for 9 years in a system that is clearly better today than it was a number of years ago. There's marked improvements there, but that is the longest period of time in the United States that any major transit agency has gone without a fare increase. But we do have a recovery ratio by law, and there's a statutory mandate from Springfield, of all places, that there be a balanced budget required by all three of the service boards, and it's our job to make sure that there's a balanced budget. We don't make those difficult decisions. That's why there's those three service boards. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that by law, there's a recovery ratio that has to be met. But thank you, Bill. And if I could get those operating debt service numbers, I'd appreciate it.
I will note that in terms of debt service, we've maintained it pretty stable. The only real variable is the fact that we've had to do the short-term borrowing, and that's running us almost $6 million per year. That $6 million could be put to to good use in infrastructure investments. Instead, we're borrowing it to cover the short-term delays. I mean, the short-term borrowing to affect the state delays.
Absolutely.
But we did eliminate our derivative portfolio, so we saved interest there, and we've also done bond refundings, which, as you know, are under threat right now with the new tax proposal. That saved us significant money over the lifetime maturity, $30 million over the maturity of a bond. So those things reduce our debt service, but in other areas, it's increasing.
And and thank goodness for your great work, Bea, as well as this board and our prior boards, all our predecessors. We have a near perfect credit rating, knock on wood, from Wall Street. That's something most entities in the state of Illinois do not have. As I said at the last meeting, we are pressured, as are counties like DuPage, which, because we have an Illinois zip code, we're penalized by just being here in the state of Illinois. But our credit rating, thank God, is near perfect due to the hard work of your staff, this board, and all our predecessors that served before us. So that's something very positive for the riders, and thank goodness we've got that and maintain that credit rating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Other comments? I think on the topic of short-term borrowing, right now, I guess at the end of November, the state owed us $447 million. I mean, that is a lot of money. As we go into 2018, that uncertainty is something that we have to be aware of, because being able to pay those bills, as Bea mentioned, it's costing us right around $5 million to borrow that money to front-end it. And more importantly, the authority to even go out and borrow the $400 million is uncertain, because it's up in July of 2018. So if the state of Illinois doesn't reauthorize that, we will have a bigger problem in July than we have now, figuring out how to deal with the $400+ million that we will not have to continue to fund it. So we have that uncertainty out there. We certainly have new fees that are untested that the service boards feel comfortable with, but whenever you put a new fee in, you anticipate it will generate a certain amount of money. So we have that in the 2018 budget that we certainly are concerned about. Our sales tax projections, we went through a tough time this past 2017 with those projections. Hopefully, by bringing them down as much as staff recommended as a projection, that'll certainly help us. But so it's not over with, that's for sure, but I think we're off to a good start. Any other questions or comments? If not, roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Cotel? Director Lewis? Yes. Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Troyani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you. Is there anything else new or old business that anyone would like to bring before the committee? If not, could we have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Director Tarani.
Second.
Second by Director Anderson. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? Ayes have it. Committee's adjourned. Thank you very much.
We'll keep moving right along, and I call this meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority to order. And if we could Director Durante lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?